1924. And today we're talking to him at his home in Bristol, Connecticut. It's May 22nd of 2010. And the interviewer is Sally Kemmler for the Veterans History Project at the Central Connecticut State University. Mr. Peters, thanks again for talking to us about your service in the Marine Corps. And maybe I'll just start by asking you whether you drafted or did you enlist?
For me, that's a very touchy subject. I was 17 years old, and I tried to get into the Marine Corps. I went down to sign up for the Marine Corps. They told me I'd have to wait until I was 18 years old, which was December the 6th, soon thereafter. So as soon as December 6th came around and I was 18 years old, I said, okay, I'm ready to go now. They said, well, we have the numbers that we need for our quota, whatever they had to go by for the month. And they said, you'll have to wait until the first of the year before we can put you in. It so happened at that time, after when 1944 started, the people that were brought in were given serial numbers that identified them as draftees. I always resented that because I was in with Marines that it became important to us that we were people that didn't just get pulled in, we wanted to be in. And it was just a kind of an ego thing, I guess, for me as a Marine, to have a serial number that started for the year 1944, when I felt that I should have gotten one when I really wanted to be in the Marine Corps. But, yeah, so I didn't know how to answer the question there, except on the discharge papers that I got. It asked me when it was enlisted date. It didn't ask about a date about any drafting business. And so I said, well, to my heart, I enlisted. And I always felt pretty good about that. But as a matter of fact, I had originally tried to get into the Navy Air Corps way back when. I was still early 17. And I couldn't pass the physical because they said, high blood pressure. I went a second time and couldn't pass it because I had high blood pressure, they told me. Finally, my buddies and I were talking about getting into the service, and they suggested, let's go and get in the Marine Corps. I said, sure, I'd be glad to go in the Marine Corps. I want to go in the Marine Corps, but I can't pass the physical because I have high blood pressure. As luck would have it, I was the one of the three that passed it. The other two had high blood pressure. So they got into the Navy later on.
And where were you living at the time that you enlisted?
In Chicago.
In Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you're from, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And why did you join?
Well, when the Japs hit Pearl Harbor, let's see, it was at that time, still 17, I guess, 41, yeah. No, I was still 16 when they hit. The next day, I guess they hit it. I and my two buddies that I mentioned a moment ago, working as ushers in a local movie theater, heard about Pearl Harbor, and we said, oh, hell. We're too young to get in it. It'll be over in a year, and we'll never be able to get in it. And obviously we were wrong later on. We had been led to believe at that time that we had the best of everything, best Army, best Air Force, and all. So we believed that it was going to be over so quickly we couldn't get in. And at that time, it wasn't a question of people being pulled into the service. Everybody seemed to want to be in because of Pearl Harbor. Yeah. So it was a kind of a natural thing to respond to the attack in Pearl Harbor. I guess that's the answer to the question.
Okay. So you were interested in the Marines. That was the service branch you would prefer?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And why was that?
Oh, I like the stories I heard about the Marine Corps. They were kind of different. And it sounded great. I was hoping that when I first tried to thought of getting into the Navy Air Corps, I wanted to get into the Marine version of that, the Marines being part of the Navy. But I couldn't pass that physical. Yeah.
Do you remember your first days in the service?
Oh, gosh. Yes. Oh, gosh, yes. It was stepping into a new world at that time. Those first few days, God, you met your drill instructor rather quickly, and he sets the stage for what happens to you for that time on. And they let you know they're the boss, and they expect you to respond to their instructions immediately at all times, without question. And so the drill instructor made himself known as God practically to us for the next, I guess it was 6 weeks that we had him as a drill instructor. And he proved it several times that he was God, by making us do the things we did the way we did them. We had to learn to do it their way without question, which is not bad.
What did it feel like being in the service?
Well, it felt like you're away from home, but it was such a different world that you didn't have too much time to dwell on what you're missing. You're being exposed to things from morning to night there, and you didn't have time to think about it too much. You were there. You had to do what you were told to do and learn what you're supposed to learn and get on with it.
Okay. So you remember certainly your drill sergeant, and do you remember any of the other instructors that?
Oh yes, I remember there were two of them. I have a photograph, as a matter of fact, of the platoon after we graduated. There were two of them. R.J. Smith, I think it's Robert, and the other one had I forgot his name. I think we used to think of him as Mac, but he was the sergeant over, and he was higher ranked than Smith was. But Smith was the one that really had us for most of that period under his wing. And he wasn't the biggest guy in the world, but God, when he stood in front of us, he was.
Were there a lot of, 17 and 18-year-olds?
Oh, yeah, they were all that way.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. No older guys. It was all 18, 19 years old. Yeah.
So you got through it in pretty good shape, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Sure. They made sure of that. Although the drill instructor was pretty demanding, let's say, of us at the time. Why, when it was all over, by that time we realized that he was doing the job for us. And so when it was all over, heck, I wanted to buy him a beer at the local slop shoot and Thanksgiving. He did a nice job.
So do you remember the journey to the Marshall Islands? Was that a long journey? That was
Oh yeah, it seemed we were on the ships quite a bit. Of course, we took off from Hawaii to go out there, and I don't remember stopping anywhere along the route when we got to the Marshall Islands. See, I was assigned to the Army while I was still in Hawaii. And so I lived with the Army for a couple of weeks, I guess it was, before the operations was to start. And so I lived with them, got acquainted with them. And so I was part of the Army. And
why did they split you off from your unit? Was it just a manpower thing?
No, they wanted a Japanese language guy to come along with them to see if we could get some prisoners, get some good out of prisoners.
Did you already speak some Japanese at that time?
No.
Oh.
Well, wait a minute. By that time, yes, I had.
Oh, okay.
I did, yes, because right after boot camp, the last day in boot camp, I was called to ask if I wanted to get into the Japanese language unit. And I asked if that meant a lot of hard work, and they said yes, so I said no. And the next day, I was in class, Watashi wa furanku desu. Yeah. They were doing it their way.
So
yeah.
you had some instruction already.
Oh, yeah. And, we had, I don't know, I'm trying to determine exactly how many weeks. I don't think we had any 2 months of language training. I think we had probably 6 weeks. I can't be sure of that at that time.
Did you have native speakers to be your instructors?
Oh, yeah. We had some. We had a Chinese sergeant, corporal, Lu Yet Ming, and then we had a Sergeant Volpe. Ming was the one that was real good at the written Japanese. And the man that was in charge of our unit was Captain Dull. He lived in Japan for quite a few years, so he was quite fluent in the language. And his right-hand man was Captain Jewett, who had also been in Japan, lived quite a bit. So they were well taught themselves, experienced people. Captain Dull was the one that was the instructor, the head instructor there at the Japanese language school. And he was the one that went aboard one of the submarines that got into the Pearl Harbor area during the war, with Pearl Harbor time. And we were very anxious as neophytes, we were anxious to know what he saw. What did you see in the Japanese submarine? Well, he had a little bottle that he showed us. And when he brought that bottle out, a lot of us immediately thought, aha, that has to be poison that the Japanese would take in case they were going to be captured. We thought they'd be taking these pills and that would be their way of doing away with themselves. And Captain Dull held up that bottle, studied it. When we said, well, what does it say on the bottle? What does it say? And he read it very carefully. He said, cleans the teeth sweetens the breath, and makes childbirth a pleasure. So he had us laughing, from the first day practically. So he had a sense of humor about him. He was good. Captain Jewett seemed to be much older than that Dulles was, but dull. I keep calling him Dulles for some reason. I think it's because of that statesman we had with that name. But they did a right good job, the four of them, in there. The sergeant, he was kind of the disciplinarian of our Japanese language group there. He was the one that saw to us that at night we were quiet when we went to hit the sack at 10 o'clock, I guess it was. He'd be the one that would be coming down and telling us to be quiet and shut up or be reported and so on. We used to, while we were in this Japanese language school, we found out that one of our fellow students had a tendency to talk in his sleep. And we kind of took advantage of this poor fellow. I don't know, for the record, should I put his name down here? George Wolfe. And George could fall asleep, bam, just like that, anywhere. He could stand against the bulkhead, and I timed him in 20 seconds. He was limp, sleeping, standing up. But anyway, he would talk in his sleep, and we used to have fun with him with that. And we would ask him questions about different people in the unit. In fact, when we heard that the sergeant coming, Volpe, was coming to tell us to knock it off and get to sleep, why, we asked him, well, what do you think of Sergeant Volpe? Well, he voiced his comments to us. Volpe didn't like that. And as a matter of fact, that might have been responsible for what happened later. I don't know if it was directly responsible, but a few days later, George called us together and said, hey guys, I know you're having some fun, but he says, you better knock it off. He says, because I don't want to get kicked out of the unit because I talk in my sleep. I mean, this fellow would talk in his sleep, and you can get him to do things. I remember we described a battle scene to him, and we had him fighting the Japanese with a rifle in his hand, cocked with no shell in the chamber, and described the battle scene to him sufficiently so that we told him when to fire, he pulled that trigger. Another time, I should... Don't tell about him. All right. Yeah, Wolfe was a star. He was subsequently sent out of the unit. Yeah, because he talked in his sleep freely.
Wow. Yeah, that's funny. Do you remember what it was like arriving in the Marshall Islands?
Well, I was part of that recon group at the time, and we were we were put on a smaller vessel. I think it was a converted destroyer. And the idea of the operation that we were on, we were to go in before daylight and paddle into shore in rubber boats, get quietly on the island, and complete the mission. Well, as luck would have it, the Navy got us there when the sun was just about to pop up brightly. And as we were paddling in our rubber boats, why, if those guys had been the least bit awake, they could have wiped out the whole bunch of us there before we ever got to shore. But fortunately, they were asleep, and then they suffered the consequences for it. But we were on this little ship, the destroyer escort, as a kind of a hit and run group. The recon group was busted up into several missions at the same time, different islands nearby, and some went one way, some went the other way. I said before that I was the only Marine with the Army unit. Actually, there was another fellow went with me to the recon group. He was split off from where I was and went with another, let's say the other half of the group. And he did his thing with them on some other islands, and we went in. I went in with this one small group over here and had that experience there at the radio station. It was silenced. The radio station was to be silenced because within the next day, Kwajalein itself was going to be attacked. The big island, which was adjacent to the small one, that was going to be attacked, and they didn't want that radio station active to benefit the Japanese.
So that was your first objective, to get the radio station?
Yes, yeah. And the recon boys did most of the shooting. And as a matter of fact, one of the souvenirs I took from that mission is a clock, a big clock that I have downstairs. That's a Japanese Navy clock. I thought that would be fun to have at home. Its numerals are in English, of course, but it was Japanese. It says it winds daily.
You mentioned that there was some jealousy about the reports that were coming in about the...
Oh, well, after that night when we were back on the little ship, I listened to a broadcast. We all listened to a broadcast describing what had happened at Kwajalein. And of a 15-minute broadcast, 13 minutes were devoted to what the Marines were doing at the north end of the atoll, while the Army, this recon group, was hitting the south end. 13 minutes were discussing the activities of the Marines, and 2 minutes, almost reluctantly it seemed, were spent talking about what the Army did at the southern end. And it put me in quite an embarrassing position to be alone with those guys on ship at that time. But I lived through it, I guess.
Well, did your unit see combat?
The group I was with?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Oh, yes.
Were there many casualties in your unit?
Well, I didn't get the word. I know of one that took a hit. I did something that you just don't do normally, but it saved me. I was walking alongside of a fellow, I think his name was Anderson, an Army guy. We were walking together, and we came to a little rise, like an oversized loaf of bread, let's say, in there. I, for some reason, walked over the top of it. It wasn't that high, I shouldn't say that, but I walked over the top of it. Even as I did it, I said, "You damn fool, you're exposing yourself up here." And as Anderson, I think that was his name, went around the corner, the side of it, as he walked over there, I heard put, 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 and Anderson went down. He was killed right then because there was a Japanese guy in there, in the hole there. And we got him. We threw some grenades in there, and the other guys came around real quick, and no more firing after that. But that dumb maneuver saved my life, I think.
So that was, that must be up at the top of your memorable experiences, or near the top. Maybe you had some other memorable experience.
Well, when I heard machine gun bullets flying over my head, that was a sound I don't want to ever hear again. That one I couldn't forget. Matter of fact, after the machine gun had been silenced by the rest of these recon guys, I went over to the machine gun and picked up a couple of the 50, I think they were 50 caliber bullets that were being thrown at us. I still have a couple of those in my souvenirs.
Wow. So that's called
Yeah.
seeing combat.
Yeah, well,
Okay. Were you ever a prisoner of war?
no.
And you have been awarded some citation?
No citations.
Oh, well,
I had the Army gave me a little letter of commendation and from activity there.
And how long were you in the theater of war?
Well, that was just a few days. I don't remember even the time. That couldn't have been 3 or 4 days, something like that, in that area.
Mm-hmm.
Then we would, after some area like that was silenced, why then, well, I think we might have gone back to Pearl. I don't remember for sure what we did after that. Because it was some time before we went into the Marianas at the next jump. That I'd have to look at my discharge papers because you want to get that.
That's okay. The date is rather than we'll get that later on.
Okay.
Were you able to? Were you called on to use your Japanese
Yeah.
translating?
Well, yeah. I can remember 2 incidents. One of them, we had a prisoner. There was one guy that survived the radio station silencing treatment, and I remember talking to him. And one of the things I wanted to know was how many men were usually on this island. I wanted to be sure that we'd gotten all of them. And he answered me in a way that I questioned. I said, wait a minute, are you trying to tell me that in a battalion there are only 22 men? And I think that was the number that he mentioned. And he used the expression daite ni, nijuichi, or nijuni, that is, then. And I kept repeating this. I thought, I'm not understanding him correctly. In a battalion, there are 22 men? And he kept saying, yes, hi. And when I sent him out to the ship that was to take any prisoners back, I sent him out with a note that said, I think this fellow has suffered too much under the bombing that preceded the hit. Well, it turned out that about 3 or 4 days later, I found out that the word daitai in Japanese can mean not only battalion, it could mean usually. And what the poor guy was trying to tell me, that usually there were only 22 men on the island, and I was too dumb to know it. I did also confirm the fact that there were that many men on the island because I found, among other papers there, I found a little record somebody had kept of the number of flies that they caught and killed every day. Flies, I think it was flies, not mosquitoes, flies. And they kept the record for the month, and they totaled it, and then they said, they named the figure. They said that this amounted to some amount of flies per man. They did the grammar school math, and I confirmed there were about 22 men on the island. Yeah.
Why did they kept that record? I mean,
I don't know. I think they must not have had much to do on the island, I guess. Now, there was one other incident there where I had to use my Japanese language. When the shooting had stopped, I was called by some of the boys that were there. Hey, Marine, you want a prisoner? I think I got one for you. And come on down to the beach. And down at the beach, they led me to an overturned lifeboat. And they said they had somebody in there. They don't know anything else about them, but they know there's somebody in there because they could hear the noise, they could hear movement. And so I spent about 10 or 15 minutes doing my best to convince this prisoner that he should come out and we would treat him carefully, we wouldn't kill him, etc. Well, every time I talked, it was quiet. After I was waiting for an answer, I could hear the movement again. There was somebody there. Finally, the recon boys had enough waiting around, and they said, "All right, we're going to shoot it up." And I said, "Wait a minute, don't do it." I said, I want a prisoner." And they said, "Okay, you turn over the boat, and we'll get him for you." And at that point, I thought, whoa. I felt a little bit alone at that moment, especially since all these fellows that were around used the term Marine in a certain way. Marine, you go turn the boat over. And there was a question of losing face, as the Japanese would say. I couldn't lose face in front of those soldiers. And so, somewhat reluctantly, I went over to the boat and I said, at the count of 3, I'll turn it over. But look, if he comes out shooting, blast away. Well, at the count of 3, I turned it over, and there were 2 of the prettiest little land crabs you ever want to see moving among empty tin cans that had somehow been underneath the boat. I was relieved that I didn't get a prisoner. Yeah.
Are there any more of those memorable experiences that you would like to, before I go on to our other list of questions?
Well, call it an experience. We were quiet for a while. Apparently, I must have gotten back with the other Marine that was with the other part of the company, because I remember we were sitting on the beach, and we were trying to eat, and the doggone flies were so plentiful that we couldn't keep them away from the chow that we had. I had a mess kit with me. I guess that's what I had. Yeah, both of us did. And I finally gave up, and I said, I can't eat my chow. And I put my mess kit down on the ground, and he did too. In a matter of a couple of minutes, both of them were black with flies. However, a moment later, we hadn't noticed, but there was a land toad that had crept along the beach there. And that little critter was sitting there, and he was watching the flies. And we saw him creep closer, and suddenly he made a lunge. His tongue came out. He must have gotten 100 flies in one lick, and he jumped right into the mess kit. Yeah. We didn't like those flies because not too far away there were some bodies that were floating in the water from something that had happened earlier. And there were bodies that had been there for, I guess, more than a day. because they were bloated and they smelled to high heaven, and these flies we thought were eating off the, and we didn't want any of that in our food.
No. Goodness. How did you stay in touch with your family during this time?
By letter only. It's the only way. Yeah. We didn't, you didn't write until things were quiet, when you had a little chance to sit down and write. All letters, of course, had to be censored.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did you encounter a lot of Japanese resistance, or was it pretty much cleared out by that time?
There?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was after that operation, the big island next door was hit, and in just a couple of days, if not, I don't think it just took that long, that was taken over completely, and the operation was done. So then must have gone back to Pearl Harbor again. I'm not sure of that. Must have gone back to Pearl Harbor, because there we were back with our Japanese language guys, and we were preparing for the next operation. We were aware there was another one coming. And what happened was, when we got to Pearl, two of us, this other Marine who had been with the recon company at the same time I was, Philip Hartley Smith, he and I were kind of given the job of being the guardian angel, I guess you say, of a Chamorro native named Miguel Tenorio. He was a native of Saipan, and the government had picked him out of the water. He was in a coal ship that had been strafed by an American plane and sunk. He was fished out of the water, and when it was found out that he was a native of Saipan, which our leadership knew that was going to be the next operation, they hired him to consult with to tell them about what went on in Saipan, how they lived, what we were going to encounter, to add to whatever we already knew, what our people knew about Saipan. And so we lived with this young fella, Miguel Tenorio. I've got a picture of him, incidentally. And we lived with him, and then as we went from there to the Marianas Islands later, Miguel was on the ship with us all the time, and night after night we were sailing there. Why, we would listen to Miguel tell us about how he was going to marry. I'm not going to maybe I won't say the name, because I'm not sure he married the gal. But anyway, he had a girl in mind at the time that he was going to marry. And he had a vision. He knew when he got to his home on Saipan that things were going to be rough there. But he had a vision that he wanted to borrow an American Jeep, have a bunch of us, 4 or 5 of us, come along with him, let him have an officer's uniform, and he was going to lead us to his house, his folks' house, and he was going to order everybody out of the house, stand up and be counted. And he was going to hide himself so they couldn't tell who he was. And the idea was that he was going to recite the name of all the people in the family, one by one. And he would finally get down to the end, Miguel. And then he said there would be a lot of weeping because Miguel was obviously dead. And then at that point, he was going to whip off his hat and uniform and have a happy reunion. It didn't quite work out that way, but he found his family on Saipan later on. They were very fortunate because on Saipan, most every family had a casualty of some kind in it, and his family had none. Although he had a fairly good-sized family, he was lucky. He had his reunion, but when it happened, all of the civilians had been gathered together in a big camp, and that's where his reunion took place, in the camp with his family. Yeah, his name, as a matter of fact, he's one of the people that were given special recognition for the work they did in helping the American forces on Saipan. There were about 4 or 5 of them that were named when they made the Marianas a commonwealth now of the United States. They have a representative in Congress right now. I asked, not long ago, I was trying to trace Miguel Tenorio, trying to find out what I could about whether he had survived the war, etc. And this congressman was nice enough to look into it for me. And he determined from what he could find that Miguel had died already. This was just, a year, about 2 years ago at the most. So Miguel had died. He was younger than we were, but he didn't make it any further.
Okay. Well, when you were in the South Pacific, what kind of groceries, what kind of food did you get?
Oh, we couldn't complain at all about the food to speak of. I mean, water was a problem. Fresh water. I mean, to this day, I can't turn on hot water and waste it.
It was hard to get fresh water.
Yeah, desalted water is not very tasty.
Oh.
I didn't like it, and I don't think anybody learned to like that stuff.
Yeah. So you had plenty of supplies.
Yeah, we had adequate supplies. There had a lot of K rations, during some of the operation time, but even they were good, I thought. I liked the cheese and whatever else they had. They had some meats in there. One of the things that was nice about the K ration package was that it included a package of 2 or 3 cigarettes. I didn't smoke, but those 2 or 3 cigarettes bought me a lot of other goodies. I could trade that for the cheese that I wanted or the sausage that I wanted, and heck, matter of fact, I did trade it for some Coke. When we got back on a Navy ship later, we traded souvenirs and cigarettes for Coke. I could have sold that Coke at $5 a bottle then, warm, when I brought it back to shore. Yeah, we distributed it among our buddies, and everybody liked to have a Coke, better than the water. Yeah, we were pretty lucky that way. But other than that, the food was generally good. We all bitched about food, of course. It was natural to do that. But we did have an adequate amount of it.
Well, did you feel stress while you were with this unit? It cannot have been a pleasure cruise every day.
Oh, no, it wasn't. No, you could feel some tension. When we got to Saipan, I didn't land with the first day invaders. No. Our company. Then I was back in the headquarters company of the 5th Amphibious Corps, the G2 section, and we came in the day after, the morning after, I guess, the first troops had hit the island. So it wasn't that bad. That wasn't bad, except that we knew about some snipers that were running around the island at the time yet. We can heard an occasional sniper bullet going off. Yeah, as a matter of fact, it wasn't all that bad because it must have been the second or third day that we were on the Marianas, Saipan, that they were showing movies back there when the operation had moved up north on the island. It was a pretty good sized island, and down there where we were, we could show movies. It was unfortunate that the first movie that we saw was the Fighting 69th with James Cagney. I think James Cagney was in it, and it was all about the Army in World War I. That didn't go over so well when we saw the title of the movie, but we watched it because there's nothing else to do.
Probably an outdoor kind of theater.
Oh yeah, it was just that's all it was outdoor.
Was there something special you did for good luck, or did you just feel lucky?
Oh, I was darn lucky. Dumb luck, I guess. On Saipan, I don't know what we were doing up there at the time, but a couple of us were, another Marine and I, and we must have had some Koreans with us that had been prisoners of the not prisoners, slave labor for the Japanese, and we had them with us for some reason. I don't know what we were doing up there, but we were going into caves, and I think it was because somehow we knew that the guy that was running the Japanese operation on the island, Saito I think it was his name, General Saito, had committed a harakiri, what we call harakiri, seppuku. And I went up there looking through different caves. Maybe I was souvenir hunting. I don't know what I was doing at the time. But I didn't find that body at the time, didn't recognize it at any rate. And we went back to headquarters later and casually mentioning to the G2 boss man, I think it was Colonel Yancey, I think was his name. He was an Army guy that was head of our Marine G2 section there. And Yancey was interested in hearing that we thought we had General Saito's body up there. And he said, well, could you find it again? And I said, well, yeah, I think so. Why? He said, well, hell, we're going to recover that body. And we'll do something like maybe bury it with full military honors or something like that. Get some mileage out of it. So he sent me back up there with my buddy and a few of these Koreans with a truck. And we left the truck below and went looking through caves that were up here. And I couldn't find it. Went back and reported to Colonel Yancey that I couldn't find it. And he looked at me and said, he says, what the hell are you doing in a G2 intelligence section? Dismissed me like that. Yeah. Anyway, he did send back up there in that area that we'd been in. He sent back some people of our recon company. Not the Army's, but we had a recon company there. He sent part of them up there. And the fellow that had been with me on the earlier tour up through the caves went with him. When he came back after the mission was over, This fellow Marine said to me, "You and I are damn lucky." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "We were in the right cave, but we didn't know it. You didn't know it. We hadn't gone in far enough," he said. "If we had gone in just a little deeper into it, we wouldn't be talking to each other now." He says, because the recon company, when they went in there, and they went in deeper than we did, they walked into a firefight. There were some Japanese that were still there, and they had a firefight. So I felt lucky. I felt real lucky again. Yeah.
That's the truth. Well, how do people entertain themselves out there on the islands?
Well, I knew they had a first-class card trickster. Well, that did card magic. That was me. I did a bunch of card tricks in my earlier days, and I used to try to entertain the guys as best we can with that. We had some. I don't know if any of those U.S. shows got to the island there or not before I left it. I can't be sure that we saw any of that. Souvenir hunting was something good once the operation had been silenced. That was pretty easy, fun to do if you could get a time away and didn't go stray too far away. I went at one point to visit a good friend of somebody I grew up with. I used to think was my cousin. I found out he was with a 155 millimeter howitzer unit up there in the island. It was still shooting shells over at the Japanese. Hearing he was up there, and I knew approximately where he was, I went up to visit him, and I found him. I found my cousin, and when I call him my cousin, when my cousin introduced me as the guy that was responsible for talking him into getting into the Marine Corps, his buddies around there promptly rushed me to grab me, and they offered my cousin the chance to have me stuffed into one of the cannons, and they would fire me into the Japanese side of the island. I got a picture of that group incident, a very small one. I called my cousin to confirm that was the picture, and he remembered the picture well because he has a copy of it. Yeah, that was a little moment of levity for us. Yeah.
Did you get a chance to take any leave while you were in the service, or?
No, I don't think I ever came home. I didn't come home. No. Dumb luck, again. We were on Saipan. Our whole unit was supposed to go over to the next island, somewhat smaller than Saipan, Tinian. Our company unit was to go over there. I was on a truck, ready to go down to the beach and go over as part of that group. And somebody yelled out my name and told me to get off the truck. He said, "You got some special orders." And those special orders told me to get my tail down to the beach and over this way, get down to the guy that was considered the harbor master and tell him who I was, and he was going to arrange for transportation for me to go out on one of the ships out there. That I was going to go out there and I found out later I was to interrogate a boatload of prisoners on the way back to Pearl Harbor. Now, here again, a little story. The harbor master, or beach master, did arrange for transportation for me, got me onto some kind of I forgot what we used to call those vessels, but it's the kind that you carry troops in the shore, drop the front end off, and he got me on one of those and got me along to one ship. Now, as far as I could see the horizon this way and this way, I saw nothing but ships out there. All American ships were out there. Hundreds of them, it seemed like. And they led me to one ship, and then there was a Jacob's ladder on the side of the ship, and I was supposed to climb over this climb up this Jacob's ladder onto the ship. That was they didn't have gangplanks, you know. Now, a Jacob's ladder is a rope ladder that has some wooden slats in it. It's tied near the bow of the ship, and you can climb up that. And I tried to climb up that thing. Then the ship swayed just a little bit, and this Jacob's ladder also moved. I had all of my gear on my body at that time. Everything I had was there, including my rifle, including my Japanese dictionaries, everything, whatever I had, was on my back. And I had all I could do to get into a vertical position, much less just remain in that horizontal position where I was in hanging like this. Well, anyway, long story short, I did manage to get up topside. I stepped onto the deck, exhausted, all but stepped on a sailor who was kind of sacking in right there on the shore. And when I looked at him, I couldn't believe. This was WWII Bros. He was part of the ship's company. He lived about as far away from me in Chicago as that house across the street, if not that far. He lived that close to me. And he was on that ship. If I hadn't stumbled across him, I might never even known he was on the ship, because the ship's company was a pretty good-sized group, and I might never have run into him at all on the ship. And here I am, all but step on WWII Bros, step in on that ship. Boy, I thought the arm of coincidence had been yanked right out of its socket with that meeting. Yeah, that was fun. On the way back with the prisoners, we played cards a great deal. And at one point, when we were playing cards with the sailors on board ship, WWII was watching my back and watching me play. And I was having such good luck, I couldn't believe it, playing poker. And I got careless, and the sailor that was opposite me in the game called his hand and showed me his cards. He says, "I've got a flush." Well, that beat what I had at the time. And so I was ready to give him the money. But WWII behind me dove kind of over the top of me onto the cards that the guy had put down, and he spread them. And here, they were all red, but the one in the middle was a diamond or a heart instead of a diamond, like the others had been. It looked, when he flashed them to me and showed me he had a flush, I bought it. Never thought anything about it. But WWII was smart enough to realize that somebody was hoodwinking me. Needless to say, that guy left the table. Yeah.
So, do you play pranks on people? I mean, aside from the guy who talked in his sleep.
Yeah. In boot camp, we had one that I remember. When you were just in training to be a Marine, why, you got to be pretty close to a bunch of guys. And when we get packages from home, it was nice if you'd share them with the guys, you know, because we weren't at that time allowed to go down to enjoy any goodies. They wouldn't allow us to do that for those first few weeks we were in. And there was one fella that didn't believe in sharing what he got. And so we played a little prank on him one night. Just before we hit the sack, we were talking about the animals that were in the area and how they were getting close to some of our barrack buildings. And earlier, I had found a piece of fur somewhere. I don't know where the hell that came from, but that was part of our little prank. When this fella hit his bunk that night and was barely in his sack, we very quietly put a string over his body from one side of the bed to the other over here. We tied that end of the string to the fur. And as soon as he got comfortable, we slowly pulled that fur right across his chest and face. And when he felt that, I swear, I think he could have been running yet. He just got out of that sack something fierce. Well, after that, he shared his goodies like everybody else did. Yeah. That fellow that I told you about that talked in his sleep, he was different. In his high school days, he had been a track star, and so we learned more about him in his earlier sessions with us. We learned more about him, and so we created a little scenario for him that he was a track star. He was going to race with the reigning track people of the time. I think Jesse Owens was the man, and a fellow named Gunder Haig, I think, was also around that time. And they had we described the race that he was in with these two guys. And you could see him in bed, tense up as we got him ready to go, and boom, and then, boy, he jerked practically off the bed. Now, the race went good for him for a while, but the other guys were getting ahead of him. He's got to go faster, faster. His legs started moving faster and faster. And, well, we let him win the race. And he was very happy, especially since his girlfriend, Dorothy, that we knew something about it from an earlier session, had come to greet him and to throw her arms around him. But she never got to him, not in the way we presented the story. Because she was stopped by his high school rival for Dorothy. I think his name was Pete or something like that. Well, anyway, Pete stopped Dorothy. Look at that guy. He's taking your Dorothy. Hey, he's taking her over to that couch. Look what he's doing to Dorothy. And then, you've got mad as could be. I said, look, and I rolled up a sheet of newspaper that we had. I rolled it up and I said, Wolfie, you gotta kill this guy. And I rolled up that paper, put it in his hand. I said, you got a knife, go get him. And I described him to himself going up behind the sofa. And I said, okay, now raise your arm. And he raised his arm with the knife. I said, get him. And he got this far and he said, he threw the knife down. He says, nah, I hate that son of a bitch, but I can't kill him.
Oh my goodness.
And yet, here's the same guy that during another session was willing to pull a trigger on a rifle if you describe the circumstances properly, but he wouldn't kill this guy that was fooling around with his girlfriend. Yeah.
So, did you keep a diary or?
No. The only attempt I've ever made to keep a diary was when I received a letter one day, two 2 days after I had dreamt of this girl. And she wasn't a girl that I knew much about, just somebody in the neighborhood kind of. But I got a letter from her 2 days after I dreamt about her. And I thought, man, is it possible that I could be prophetic in my dreams? So I tried to keep track of my dreams for a few days on that. But unfortunately, no, there was nothing prophetic in my dreams. That was it, and the only time it worked.
Well, what did you think about your fellow soldiers or your officers? Did you have strong opinions about them?
Oh, in boot camp, you hated your DI.
Mm-hmm.
You hated him and anything that represented him.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't say that we particularly disliked the officers. No, the only confrontation I ever had with one was when in some practice that we were going through and hand-to-hand fighting, one of the guys had gotten stabbed a little bit with a knife, and I wanted to take my pack. I had a little pack that was on my belt, bandage in there, and I was going to put it on, and this lieutenant stopped me, and he said, "No, don't waste it. It's not that big a thing." It wasn't. And well, I argued with him. Here he was. He was old. He must have been 23 or 24 years old. And to me, he's what, 18? Why was I going to take a lip from a guy that was that old? But other than that, I've never had any problems with any officers that I can remember.
Yeah. Do you recall the day your service ended?
In November of 1945, I remember that. I got out at Great Lakes Naval Training Station up outside of Chicago. I think my discharge papers said that I was at that time being discharged, and I had been earning a monthly salary of, was it $60? Did I tell you? $66 a month, which seemed a lot to me at the time, I guess. And they gave me about $10 for transportation to go home and take the train down to Chicago and go home. That was the way I was out.
So you were on a base, so there was no big homecoming scene for the group.
No, not there. You see, I was very fortunate the way my life turned out after that ship with those prisoners. Caused a major change in my life. We had these prisoners to take back, to Pearl Harbor. There were Marines on board the ship that were to act as guards for those prisoners, so we didn't have any trouble with them. And those fellows had just been stateside in a training program of some kind that had made them live for a while on a college campus. And they described that campus life for me in such glowing terms that when I got back to Pearl Harbor, I couldn't get there quickly enough to ask if I could get into the Navy's V-12 program, which was an officers training program, and but that would be at some college someplace, and those fellows influenced me so that I did take my discharge, or my points, and I could go back to the States and get into that program. I never wanted to go to college when I was in high school. I couldn't dream of it. I didn't want to go. My folks couldn't have afforded to go to send me. And so I never would have gone to college if it wasn't for the service twist.
So you got some training on the college campus?
Oh, yes, yes. After, it was in, what, it was in 1944. A month after I applied, I was accepted for the college training program, and I was on my way back from Pearl Harbor to the States, and went to the University of Michigan. And where they had a V-12 program there, which had Marines and sailors in it, and they were future officers candidates. It was great. Incidentally, on that ship with the prisoners, I was called down to the below deck because a fight had started between the Japanese prisoners we had and the Koreans that were there. A fight had started. Why had the fights started? Because the Korean, who the Japanese thought were beneath them, the Korean had used in a friendly form of the word I when he was talking to this Japanese fellow, instead of using the terms that would show a higher elevation of respect for the Japanese guy. This guy used the familiar form of the pronoun, and a fight started. When I went down to see what that was all about, after the fight had been quelled by the guards, the Japanese fellow that I was talking to, talked to me and had explained what was going on. I didn't realize at the time what he was talking about, but he was patient with me, and he finally made me understand. But then he was very cordial to me, and he talked to me as I were Second Lieutenant Frank Furanko-san. I was Second Lieutenant Frank. I said, I told him I'm not a second lieutenant. Oh, he bowed still more, and he said, First Lieutenant Frank. I said, no, I'm not a first lieutenant either. And he tied on the phone. No, I said, I'm not a captain either. Now he looked at me. Here I am, 18 years old. He looked at me, Major Frank? And I said, no, I'm not a major. And then he said, well, what are you? When I told him I was a private first class, it was like he looked around to be sure nobody had heard me. I slapped it like I had slapped him in the face almost. That's the way he acted. He looked around, and then he managed to explain to me in Japanese that I really didn't understand at first, but he got the point across to me. If I want to come down the hold of the ship safely and be treated with proper respect, I'm Second Lieutenant Frank. I am not private first class Frank.
Okay.
And needless to say, I was promoted that day. I was really up there.
Did you make close friendships while in the service?
It was some of us, the Japanese language guys stayed pretty close. A lot of us did for a while. And after the war, some of them started to get together, and a small group of us formed, and we met on a biannual basis or so, something like that. We would go to some town or other, San Francisco. They came here once. One couple would be the host couple and see that you had some fun while you were here visiting. And we kept in touch with those fellows. It was a small group. We were only, 15 at one time? I remember 15, but anyway, there's only 2 of us left right now. fellow up in Albany, New York, and myself. He's older than I am.
There were 8 now, excuse me, there were 15 in the whole group.
There were.
Did your military experience influence your thinking about the military or about war?
Yes. Enough so that I can't stand the fact that we are sending troops over like we are, for the reasons that we are, to get maimed and or killed like they are now. I'm totally against it. Totally against it for the reasons that were there.
What did you go on to do as a career after the war?
I think the first job I got was as a draftsman. I worked for a small bearing company that was not too far away from home, Etna Ball and Roller Bearing Company. I became a draftsman. I had had a little drafting experience in college, in some of the courses that we had, and I was good enough to be able to get a job for the requirements they had at the company. They didn't have, it didn't need an ultra draftsman to do with a few circles and no, but that was influential because eventually that led me to applying for a job with a General Motors division, and my experience on the drawing board at Etna Ball and Roller Bearing Company was useful to Hyatt Roller Bearing Company division of General Motors. And so that's how I got into GM.
How did your service and experiences affect your life?
How what?
How did your service and your experiences?
Well, one of the bad things about it was that I believed too strongly in discipline. And I expected it of my kids. And that wasn't the best choice of the way to raise kids. I wasn't that good at it. I demanded immediate response and strict discipline. And so that didn't do them any good. But I liked the discipline of the service. After the war was well over, not too many years ago, my sister gave me a cap that identified me as a World War II survivor. And I met many, many people on the street as a result of that. And those that were Marines that approached me and we talked, I began to ask them, most of them, were you ever sorry you got out of the Marine Corps? And almost to the man, they've said yes. And at the time, some time after the war was over, and I was out of the service for quite a while, I had regrets for having gotten out when I did. Because I liked the Marine Corps. I liked it very much.
The discipline aspects and the pride of it.
Oh yeah, there's a lot to do with that. You knew where you felt you were in a top grade outfit.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to add that we haven't covered yet?
No.
That's pretty much it for the time being.
One thing, one episode in my life that was in boot camp, I like to tell people about because it gives you an idea of the kind of people we had as drill instructors. I was in among a group of guys that were standing around waiting for the DI to come out, and a Jeep pulled up, and it was a friend of the drill instructors. And somehow I knew he was going to visit the drill instructor, and smart aleck Frank shouts out, "Ah, a new boot." Well, that afternoon I was invited to come into the drill instructor's hut with my rifle for that evening after chow. And when I walked into the hut, there was a fellow there who was with his rifle, was holding the rifle in his hands like this and going up and behind his head, up and here. And he'd been doing that for some time. And after a while, the instructor, the DI said, "Proceed." And I was to do the same thing. And so I started doing that. And within another 5 or 10 minutes, I guess, the fellow that had been there, he dropped. He dropped from exhaustion. And he was allowed to get out. I was to continue. The drill instructor said, just keep on going. And after a while, it started to show that I was getting tired. And so the drill instructor said, "Oh," he said, "you're getting tired." He says, "Would you like to rest a little?" "Yes, sir. Yes, sir." He grabbed my rifle and he said, "Here, let me show you how a Marine rests. Put your arms out in front of you like this, palms down." And I did extend my arms. He laid the rifle across my fingertips. And he says, "Don't you drop that piece, boy." It was seconds. It was, seconds. And I'm trembling. God, as soon as he saw me start to waver, he said, "You won't drop it." And up, he came up for a moment. But after a while, I knew I was going to have trouble. Well, as luck would have it, an MP was roving around the area, and he had looked through the window and had seen something was going on here. He came in, asked the drill instructor for an explanation, and the MP told him, he says, "You can't do that to these kids. You better stop." And so the MP left, and the drill instructor let me rest. As I was going out, I asked him, "How long, where are you going to let me go?" He says, "Until you drop like the other guy." Yeah, they were God.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much.
My pleasure.